Hey guys, welcome back to the Friday Vlog, where we discuss activity that goes on here with the BuzWeaver channel. That includes things like current events, headlines that are in the news, social media, pop culture, technology, and items of interest that come up during the week that allow us to have a little bit of a dialogue. If this is your first time here to the channel, or you are a returning visitor as well as subscribers, I want to thank all of you guys for your continued support of the channel. In gaming news this week on Tuesday, DICE released the next to last update for Battlefield 5, which is kind of a bittersweet moment for all of us, as we know that in June that will be the last of the updates and or general support for the game, as we'll see a new map release. Now, there was so much potential that could have come out of Battlefield 5, but it did have a very rocky and shaky start, a lot of PR issues, and then issues within the community. And so it looks like, as a result of the pandemic as well, that Battlefield 5 will come to a rather abrupt closing. So nonetheless, of course, we were kind of anticipating this particular update, where we see a series of fixes and additions and changes to the game that will provide levels of benefit that will help the game. But of course, there are still areas that really need work, and we may not actually see these particular areas addressed or fixed. But there were a lot of UI changes, there were changes to player uniforms or character uniforms and so forth. So nonetheless, it was interesting to see this, and of course we can anticipate that one last update in June. Now, shifting gears to Infinity Ward, of course, up here in the top right hand corner you can see the community news that I released on Monday, where we go over just the general community news as well as details and information from Infinity Ward themselves. And we kind of go over what happened last week and what we can anticipate into this week. So I'd encourage you guys to check that out up there in the top right hand corner. The biggest news story this week, not only here in the state of Georgia, but in the United States and perhaps around the world. So Georgia has made it into the news yet again, and this surrounds the case of Ahmaud Arbery. And the thing about this, guys, as I present this to you, keep in mind here that I'm going to try to be as objective as I can. I like taking the information from the local news because it gives you a better picture as opposed to what you hear from the national news, the mainstream media, or even from your world press, depending on what country you're from, because at least here we can give you a little bit more of a definitive outline that at least has levels of objectivity, and that is what I want to do as well. If you have been a follower of my channel, then you know that I had the opportunity to work in law for several years. The last 2 of those years, I worked at a law firm that dealt almost entirely with criminal law, and then I worked with the state in criminal law. So this particular event is rather common. It does have an approach that law enforcement and authorities and the legal system will approach. But of course, many of you have probably heard the jury of public opinion versus the actual jury trial, which will take place where facts and information will be presented. And as of this recording, we have learned even more information about this. But let me read from some of these articles that I will list down below this video and kind of give you a breakdown commentary. And I also want to emphasize again that as I outline this as objectively as I can, keeping it concise and within the facts, that is not to dismiss the fact that a young man lost his life, nor coming to the defense of the individuals that are part of this investigation. So, reading from the article, Brunswick, Georgia. The district attorney who recused himself from the case of a black jogger shot and killed by 2 white men in South Georgia defended the decision not to seek arrest. Now, this is preliminary when it first came out. Ahmaud Arbery, 25, was shot and killed in February while out for a jog in a residential neighborhood. The suspects, Gregory McMichael, 64, and Travis McMichael, 34, told police that they were pursuing a burglary suspect and that Arbery attacked them. The 2 were initially arrested. However, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the GBI, was called in to investigate the case after video taken by a third person of the killing became public. McMichael and his father now both face charges of murder and aggravated assault. Okay, that's kind of the gist of the story. Here's some of the additional facts that we have learned since then, and of course there will probably be even more facts unfolding. So the first part here is that it was presumed that this individual was out jogging in this neighborhood, and as we understand it now, Mr. Arbery actually lived 10 miles from this particular location, And as mentioned in this last part here, a third person who had video evidence or video information about this case. We know that there has actually been several times that Mr. Arbery had visited this location, and there are several videos of him visiting this location and the individual who contacted police the first time that it happened. They called the non-emergency police line to report what had happened, and they want to emphasize that during those calls they never suggested or implied that Mr. Arbery was doing anything illegal, other than the fact that he was on the property and that they wanted to inform the police. I'll go more into details about that in a moment, but of course, you have to take what you have heard. I want you to think about what you have heard and what I have just read to you that gives you the gist of this information, because unfortunately, this was an opportunity for many of the people within social media and even the media to engage in identity politics, as well as to sensationalize the story to promote a narrative which is just as tragic and unfortunate as the actual incident itself. And I'm sure you guys have heard many of the stories, and this was an opportunity for many within the mainstream media to push their identity politics, unfortunately. And of course, this is something that we have come to expect from social media, and then it becomes even more compounded by the response out of social media, because a lot of it has been misconstrued, misinformed, and taken out of context. So now, I want to continue on with some additional information that we have also learned this week. Brunswick, Georgia. The Georgia Department of Investigations confirmed Saturday, May the 9th, that agents are reviewing additional video as they work to piece together the minutes before the deadly shooting of Ahmaud Arbery. We are indeed reviewing additional video footage and photography as part of the active case, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation said, which was asked to help investigate the case, said in a statement Saturday. It is important to note that this footage was reviewed at the beginning of the GBI investigation and before the arrest of suspects Gregory and Travis McMichael. So you see there was already activity going on. There was already information, solid information, that the media and the social media informants and cancel culture could have brought to you, but they didn't, because they had a narrative to push. Newly released CCTV footage from February the 23rd shows a man dressed in clothes matching those of Ahmaud Arbery on a private construction site approximately 240 yards from the scene of Arbery's fatal shooting on that day. Now again, as I mentioned, Arbery lived 10 miles away from this location. The property belongs to Larry English, who said that CCTV had captured a trespasser on the property a number of times before February the 23rd. Now, however you want to extrapolate that information, whether he was trespassing or whatever he was doing there on the property, of course, does not amount to him being killed, right? There is no justice for that as far as him being punished for being on this property by being killed for it. So I want to read just a little bit more into that. After the first time that video captured someone in the house, Mr. English contacted local law enforcement on a non-emergency number, as I mentioned a moment ago, and made them aware of the unauthorized entry into his property, said English's attorney Elizabeth Grady in a statement. He never used the word burglary. He never shared any of this information with the McMichaels, who apparently were his neighbors, whom he did not even know, but I guess lived, a little bit down from the Michaels. Nothing was ever stolen from the house, which again was a construction site. So the emphasis here is, so now you have kind of a gist. You kind of have kind of the more objective outline of the story. So the thing here with Mr. English is that now he has been getting death threats for simply having videotaped the incident. And from what we have read from him, he was simply out working in his yard, cutting his grass, when he saw the young man, Mr. Arbery, running down the street or jogging, as it were, from whatever location he was coming from, presumably from the private property. And then he recognized the truck of the Michaels, who were then engaged in a conversation with him. And we see the video transpire. where Travis then gets out of the vehicle and confronts the individual in what they believe to be a citizen's arrest. Now, it's unknown how the Michaels knew that this individual was out there, but they were either tipped off by a bolo that was posted on Facebook, or they heard it from a police scanner, or someone informed them about it, and they were going to go and try to make a citizen's arrest, as it were. And of course, the whole thing just completely broke down and fell apart and resulted in Mr. Arbery's death. Unfortunately, of course, this was, again, taken out of context, and you know what you have heard from your local news or from your world news, as well as from social media, which is a very sad and unfortunate situation that was taken out of context, mischaracterized, very similar to what we saw with the Covington kids and with many other stories that we've seen, particularly when it pertained to the president, where he made his statement about disinfectant and it was taken out of context with the media. But I'm telling you, as someone who worked in law, this will be thoroughly investigated. It will be looked into. And of course, again, I want to emphasize that the young man should not have lost his life by simply perhaps a misdemeanor crime of trespassing. So we'll get more information about the case. We'll get more information and details to pursue. But keep in mind here, I don't know whether or not the media, at least in the mainstream or even in your world media, will continue to pursue this information and unfold it, because the initial burst of information, just like with Jussie Smollett, was to evoke clicks and views for the various media sites, and for social media to get engaged in the cancel culture to jump on board so that they could virtue signal with it. And unfortunately, all this is surrounding around a young man who lost his life, and a story behind individuals who thought they were doing something for their community by pursuing this individual, with additional background stories as to why they were doing this in particular. We'll go into those stories as this develops, but I wanted to give you guys the initial outline so that you would know to make so that you would be able to make a comparison to what you have heard versus what is out of our state right now. But as I mentioned, I will post the links to those articles below this video. Last year, I made a video on the social media war, kind of a breakdown for you from the resistance from 2016 all the way to what we are experiencing today. I want to mention this because it kind of ties in with what happened with this particular case that we just mentioned in the previous segment concerning Ahmaud Arbery, and how the social media groups, special interests, and others have perpetuated this idea of a particular topic that I'm going to cover here, and that is something that Glenn Beck talked about several years back, and I will link that video below this video and tie all these kind of together to illustrate for you how these types of stories, how the situation today, because of the social justice warrior movement, if you want to call it that, based upon the resistance and the council culture, have created an environment of hostility, have created an environment of inciting and fomenting types of outrage that we see very often in social media when these types of situations that we just talked about in the last segment occur. And it is unfortunate that these things happen, but in the social media video, I go over these particular topics and outline of how this developed. But also within the video there of Glenn Beck, he talks about social justice. This was 10 years ago, and he was talking about how the progressive movement that has now expanded quite a bit since those 10 years have passed into what we have today. And it's important to keep in mind here when we tie this together, particularly when it comes to social justice, as it has very similar components to the greater good. And the reason I mentioned these is because they tie together in how people approach it. Remember, I mentioned the jury of public opinion and then the actual objective jury trial that would take place. So with social justice and or the greater good, you have a component here that takes you outside of the rules and or the law to allow for an amalgamation of these ideologies, or to go outside of the law if for some reason individuals feel that the justice system, the legal system, the rules or policies are not working in their favor. They want to be able to adjust the goalpost. They want to be able to move the lines and adjust the rules to accommodate not necessarily the facts, not necessarily the information that gives you a clearer picture or the truth, but to satisfy an emotional need. And the thing about that is, when it comes to social justice or when it comes to the greater good, there is something else I want to tie into this as well. For many years, I have followed Christian apologetics. I have participated in Christian apologetics in the late 90s and into the early 2000s. And there is a very interesting question that is presented by Frank Turek when he is visiting these campuses and universities throughout the United States. And that is a question that often comes up. For example, at the end of his commentary, his lectures, he has a question and answer session. And usually this is when people just, either Christians or of other faiths or even atheists, come and ask a question. And he asks particular individuals, particularly usually atheists, if Christianity were true, would you believe it? Now, this is kind of what's called a complex question, but the answer, of course, from many of them is no, they would not. And so what he essentially emphasizes here, and what I'm emphasizing here, is that people aren't necessarily on a truth quest. They are on a happiness quest. They're on a emotional satisfaction quest, and they don't want to be held accountable for or be responsible for particular actions, because they want to be able to feel good about themselves. They want to be able to feel good about the world. They want to be able to feel good in general and do things without the consequences of their particular actions. Now, I can't speak for atheists when it comes to how they answer that, nor can I represent every single person when it comes to the ideology and philosophies that you may have. But the point that Frank Turek was trying to make is that he presents the question, which is what's known as a complex question, in that individuals aren't necessarily always squarely focused on the truth or the facts. They are looking for some additional emotional satisfaction from a situation, and the facts and or the information is actually derivative or arbitrary. And we see this very often. I see this in the mindset of this social justice and greater good mindset, where if the law just isn't working the way you want it to, if things just aren't working out the way you want to be able to have an additional component that allows you to then present something new, or to provide some sort of special attention or merit to a situation, an immunization to a situation that goes outside of what you want the law to be, so that it fits a particular narrative that you have. I hope I made that clear enough. I may have overcomplicated it a bit, but the point being here is that with this particular case, as we talked about, when it pertains to social justice, or for example, with this individual third party who made this videotape, that individual has not only had his life threatened, but he has lost his job. And presumably it is because of the pressure coming from these particular special interest groups, the social justice warriors, these particular individuals who oftentimes look for special rights, who often look for the ability to have certain rights and or privileges that others, or they perceive that others have, and in particular when it comes to justice or our legal system, where things, or in their perception, are not always fair or don't always work their particular way, which is kind of like going back to Frank Turek's question. But I also want to put up a meme, an illustration here on the video, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase it if I don't say it exactly the same. But you see an individual here says, "I'm for free speech, just not hate speech." And the response from the other individual is, "Well, I'm for physics, just not gravity." So again, it illustrates, very similar to Frank's question, is that people aren't necessarily on a truth quest to get the entirety of the information or the facts, but are on an emotional satisfaction quest to appear to be on the side of some particular injustice that has happened to someone or a situation. And so they want to jump in and try to inject their own ideologies, their philosophies, and worldviews to make a situation fit a particular narrative. And that's what we saw, I believe, when it comes to Mr. Arbery here, the Covington kids, with President Trump and the current administration, how things are taken out of context, things are taken and driven by a narrative by certain groups of individuals to try to make a point, whether it's the mainstream media trying to get clicks and views, or just individuals out there to to provide some sort of virtue signaling that they are so that they're so interested in pursuing. But nonetheless, guys, I just kind of wanted to add that additional component to that particular or to this story based upon just the original story that I made with the social media wars, as well as tying it in with the Arbery case. But if you guys haven't had a chance to see either of those videos, either the social media war or the social media war, right, and then Glenn Beck, I will include those below this video. All right, guys, so that's going to wrap it up for this Friday vlog. I hope that you were able to understand what I was trying to present there. And this was a very huge story as it concerns Ahmaud Arbery. And we will continue to keep an eye on it as this continues to develop. But nonetheless, guys, I want to thank all of you for your continued support. The likes, the shares, and the comments has been really amazing to see the growth of the channel. It's been kind of odd the way things have worked out since December. But now things are starting to turn around. I'm seeing better metrics. I'm seeing a lot more subscribers. So I want to thank all you guys for your continued support. And those of you that are following this on DTube and or BitChute and Minds and Gab and these other platforms that I post the videos on, I want to thank all of you guys for your continued support as well. And appearing there on the screen for all of the YouTube subscribers, that would be the obligatory channel icon appearing right there. For those who haven't subscribed, you can now by clicking on that, as well as notifications. That way you guys will know when there is content here on the channel, to include the Friday vlogs. And I will see you guys right there behind the camera next week.